All right, it looks like we are live. Thank you, folks, for tuning in, for joining us in this space, for being our new friends. Here to hear our old friends talk about how we work together and the technologies, ancestral and digital and otherwise, that keep us in community with each other. My name is or Sruti. I'm a co-organizer with Art.coop. I use they, them pronouns. Calling in from Lenape-Hulking. Some people know it as Brooklyn, Kensington specifically. And I'm really excited to welcome all these amazing people into this virtual space together to talk about how, I don't know, intrinsic they are to the work that we do at Art.coop and as culture makers more largely. And culture bearers more largely. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to speakers to do quick introductions, just their name, their pronouns, and a description of where they're coming from. Also a visual description if you do that. I am a brown person with black hair pulled back, have a yellow background calendar behind me. I'm wearing a black turtleneck with a blue striped shirt on top. I have white walls. And I'm going to pass to Ebony to introduce herself really quickly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ebony. I use she, her pronouns. I am also on Lenape land, but in New Jersey. And I am caramel colored with short hair. And I have this plant in the back that looks like an afro and a white background and mirror. And I can pass it to Rad.
Thanks, Ebony. Hey, y'all, I'm Rad Pereira. I use they, them pronouns. I'm calling in from Onondaga territory of the Greater Haudenosaunee Confederacy, what's currently known as Syracuse. And my background is very blurry, so you can see some shades of pink and gray, and I am a brown-skinned queer person. And I will pass it to LP.
Hi all, I'm LP, also Lillian fam. I use they, she pronouns. I'm calling from Kalowitz and Kalapuya lands, so-called Portland, Oregon. And my background right now is washi tape, cactus, greenish on tan wall. And I am a Southeast Asian, brown skin person wearing glasses, and you can also see the panels from the reflections on my glasses. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it on to Kimmy.
Hi, y'all. So nice to be here. My name is Kimmy. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a Sephardic Ashkenazi person with curly hair and glasses, and I'm wearing some button-up shirts. I'm usually based in Tavangar, which is known as Los Angeles, but I'm calling in from Powhatan territory, Richmond, Virginia, where I'm just right now temporarily, and excited to be here.
And
and pass it to Or.
Hi, everybody. My name is Or Zabalski. I use they, them, and I am an Ashkenazi person wearing glasses and a blue button-up shirt, short hair that's getting slowly gray. And I am in my bedroom, which is blurred by this funny visual effect that some of us are using. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing.
I didn't say where I'm calling from. Sorry, I'm calling from Lenape-Hulking and also referred to by some as Brooklyn.
Amazing. Thank you, folks. Thank you, friends. Like I said, we're here today to talk about technologies of friendship, so the ancestral technologies that we use to keep in touch with each other, and also the different, digital technologies and other technologies that we use today to hopefully have healthy relationships, but also understand that digital technologies and other technologies can also, create unhealthy balances in facilitating relationships. And so I want to start by asking everyone to maybe share a little bit about what brings y'all into this space, this panel today, the different relationships, friendships, and technologies that each of you have used to connect with us at Art.coop, with each other, and or with other artists in your community.
I can start. I was very, very grateful to be brought into this work and worldview by the amazing Natalia Linares, who introduced me to Caroline Bullard and Marina Lopez. And I was able to host, MC the kind of, I think it was the first like 8-week workshop of basically popular education around solidarity economy for artists. And then since then, I've met the amazing Sruti, and we're starting to get to know each other too through some online learning modules in conjunction with creative study. Yeah, and it's pretty amazing for me to kind of like blur the line, blur intended up here, between work, labor, and friendship, because it just makes it all worth it and brings so much more purpose and meaning to it all. So yeah, thanks for having me. Oh, and Ebony and I co-host the creative study modules. So I just started getting to know Ebony as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I loved most about that experience when we were filming the modules together, we filmed them at a person who works with creative study, their house, and it felt like this invitation to be in somebody's personal space and allow naturally like the things that we wanted to talk about to bubble up. Like I think Rad, you and the folks from Meerkat Media Cooperative who filmed our online learning modules, we're talking about like representation in media, but also talking about like the realities of living and working in New York. And, it felt very real. And yeah, if other folks have similar kind of reflections.
Yeah, I love that in the spaces that I keep being invited into for work, that I keep seeing the same faces. And I haven't met Kimmy or Lillian yet, but Or and I were also a part of this group where we were in the inception phase of creating a online learning platform for all things solidarity economy. And Or was the tech wizard. And it was also really beautiful in that space that they brought Or in from the beginning to conceptualize it with us rather than bringing them on at the end. And so in all the projects that we've been collaborating in with Art.coop, it's always been very relational and not transactional. And I was first introduced to Art.coop through Caroline, who reached out to me to do some peer review for an amazing report that Art.coop and CCI Arts wrote called Spirits and Logistics, which was also the first time I knew about Sruti just by name. And I feel like the common thread again has been like education and cultural shift with the work that I've been doing with Art.coop.
I can share. I feel like, yeah, Shruti invited me in and we met not too long ago through this hologram care network thing through a mutual friend, Alice Zhang, who I know from just community in Los Angeles. And I've had a few friends kind of be involved in Art.coop, Markel Collins, for example, if y'all know them, I don't know. And have kind of like admired the work from a little bit of a distance and felt a lot of affinities to it. From my own practice, I am a founding collective member of Press, which is a publishing initiative that I think shares a lot of these ideas around kind of friendship and our relationships really being the ground of our work. And yeah, so I'm excited to be here and kind of, yeah, learn about everybody's worlds.
I can jump in. I'm here in the space because of Marina Lopez. I was currently in an art and social practice MFA program with them in Portland State University. And yeah, Marina and I come from like just a similar upbringing and just clicked right away in the program. And it's been really cool to watch how she introduced Art.coop as something that was just starting. I think it was a little bit before the studies happened, the group studies were happening or during it, and then now it's just blossomed. And like just watching Marina go through that process has really inspired me to like develop my own relationships just to a larger part in solidarity economies. Part of my background and kind of the reason through Marina's work unintentionally is like getting into participatory budgeting in Portland and with Youth PB, which is like the first youth participatory process budget in the country, which is really cool. And yeah, through that, I've been also using technologies through a virtual care lab to create friendships, more friendships. And yeah, I also know Alice as well as through that space. So it's really cool to see some connections. And Rad, I have met you before, but it was kind of like in the background. You were a guest speaker that Marina brought in, which was really cool to my first year in the program. So yeah, that's about it. I'll pass it to Or.
Thank you. That's cool that you're bringing the virtual care lab into this space, and also happy to meet you in this way. I'm just like kind of a quiet lurker there, but it's nice to meet somebody in virtual person. And I came into this circle through Caroline Woolard, with whom I collaborated for many years on various different projects, and then heard a lot about Sruti, and then finally got to meet Sruti through the New Ink program that I'm a member of, and Sruti is a mentor in. And Ebony and I we're part of this working group, working with the New Economy Coalition to create this platform, or maybe to come up with, felt like maybe we were articulating what this project should be or shouldn't be, which was really beautiful. So I'm already noticing that a lot of the connections are around the process of building a technology together or envisioning a technology together. Sometimes it feels like an excuse to to be together in a structured way. And I'll just also say that I haven't met Red or Kimi yet, and I'm happy to meet you now, but I really appreciate your work a lot, so I'm happy to be in this space with you.
Amazing. Thank you, folks. Yeah, I think what you were just saying about these like systems that we build, right, to keep in touch with each other, and especially with the virtual care lab and with working groups that are more like, I don't know, that blur the boundaries of professional and personal and lean towards more restorative stuff is something that Art.coop is doing because it's an essential part of the solidarity economy practice, right? And it's like how, I mean, for me, like as somebody who's South Asian by descent, like it's how my people, like my ancestors have stayed together in community, is like building like dinner clubs or like Costco swapping parties so that they can have these different structures to meet the material needs in expansive ways and in ways that, like, I guess, disrupt capitalism and normal economics. So we've talked about some of the like the quote unquote ancestors or like people who've seeded this space, but I'm wondering, like, in the same way that like my mother's Costco club brings me here, I wonder if there's ancestors that bring y'all into this space, this physical space, but also like the larger context of talking about solidarity economics. Like, who do you honor and hold in your heart every day? And specifically, what are the technologies of alternative economic solidarity economics have they taught you, and how have they rooted that in friendship and like positive relational building?
I feel a little bit redundant because I did say I just got back from Vietnam during the break, so I'm kind of like blurring the two, but I know this panel just started, so I'm gonna just say it again. I just got back from my homecoming to Vietnam. I've never been, and I'm 24, and I went with my mom for the first time. And there's like just a lot of war traumas and stuff, so that was her first time being there since going to a funeral like 12 years ago. So she was really nervous, I was really nervous. But then when we got there, it was just like, yeah, that was it. We were just having fun. And we were also in this space near Benton and Saigon Square, which if you know that area, you know that there's like really cool fake designer bags. And most of the time, well, at first I was a little bit nervous. I was like, Mom, like I'm like an American with freaking US dollars. Like I shouldn't be bargaining lower. Like this is like, I just feel horrible. And then my mom was like, she's, by the way, she works in a factory in Indiana, and she makes like 18 an hour. And we were there, XYZ, and she was like, don't feel bad. Like you embarrass me. Just stay at home if you're not going to bargain. And then right when I got there, I just like saw the power, the technology of bargaining. And there was just so many ways we bargained. And this also included like Trident gum, which is like a big hot commodity there. But yeah, it was really fun just to learn how to use bargaining. And then through that, we would just like make a lot of friends with like vendors, even though we were like in conflict with like pricing. And they're just like, come on, like you're an American, raise up a little bit more taxes for us, a part of the package. But like also in that, they're like, wow, it's like kind of cool that you don't really know how to speak Vietnamese, but you can hear it, or that speak Vietnamese with me and like practice, which is really cool to make friendships through that. And then just a little side note is that during the end of my dinner with my mom, she was just like reminiscing on like living in Vietnam and how she grew up poor and stuff, but like she'd go to restaurants and then say they just knew her, so she didn't have to pay. But then like later on, she'd like over time accumulate like a bill that like could be paid at any time. And she's just reminiscing how like much of a community it is in there. Even though everyone's like hustling, like people still take care of each other, which is really cool. Yeah.
So my ancestors come from the Caribbean, and one of the things that they do are called susus, which is essentially like a collective pooling of money. And so each week you put in a certain amount of money, and by the end of that cycle, that money goes to one person and it just like keeps going in a cycle. And my mom said that this has supported her in like buying a car, buying a house, and even outside of the Susus, I just learned at this in this last trip where I was home that back in Panama, where my mother's from, they would like the brothers and sisters and cousins, whenever somebody needed to travel or if there was an emergency or they were just short on cash for something, that everyone would pool the little bit of money that they had in order to sustain each other. And so it hasn't informed me until now, because before, when I've heard about these things, I wasn't like, I didn't have a framework for solidarity economics. It was just something that felt intrinsic. So now looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, I was subconsciously influenced by all of these things.
Yeah, I totally feel that, Ebony. I feel like I had a similar feeling when I started like reading the words of solidarity economy, and I was like, oh, this is like what part of my family already does and has been doing. Especially in on my mom's side of the family, where I'm from is Pindorama, what's so-called Brazil. Um, and she's Black and Indigenous. And I really learned so much from the way that my mom and her 9 siblings built a care and solidarity economy around my youngest auntie that is paranoid schizophrenic, and the way that the family really created this deep system of care that's always changing based on people's needs and capacities for my whole life, over 30 years that I've been witnessing them doing that. And it just like getting to exist in that. And then, as everyone gets older, starting to learn how I can support my cousins in taking care of their mom as they build their own capacity to take on that work has been such a huge influence. Am I breaking up? Can people still hear me? I'm good. Okay. Has been a huge influence to me as I've gone into art spaces, community organizing spaces throughout my life. Because it can't be rigid, like I feel like that's like one of the biggest things I continually learn about how solidarity economy can work is that like how do we build the containers for flexibility, to be able to be flexible and malleable as all of our needs are ever shifting. And then today i'm I'm actively learning how to be part of the Haudenosaunee community, who have some of the oldest existing solidarity economies in the world that are still being practiced today. And how do I give credit and continually honor their contributions everywhere I go? So that's also something that my own assimilation in some ways into whiteness or into capitalism that I've been trying to shed and unlearn is how to continually also give credit and attribution to where the learnings are coming from. So that's an ancestral technology that I'm trying to relearn and reclaim to serve our greater solidarity economy movement as well.
I resonated with a piece of what you said, Rad, about kind of discovering the language for a solidarity economy and then being like, oh, this is like something that's already happening in my life without me knowing the language for it. And I can share that I feel like I was raised with kind of both a deep sense of like distrust and like suspicions of the structures that we live in, and also this sense of like cooperation and friendship and community as like a survival strategy. And I think that I mean, if I'm to kind of reflect on my kind of ancestors, I'm on one side, my mom's family is Sephardic, which means that they were Jews who were exiled from Spain and then made their way to Ottoman-ruled Palestine in the late 1400s, early 1500s. And on the other side, my dad's family are Ashkenazi Holocaust surviving Jews. And then I myself am an immigrant to the United States. And so I think there's like exilic and migratory traditions in that past that I think have informed just the kind of more everyday distrust, but also like valuing of like, no, like our relationships are our survival. And I think also a sense of like scrappiness, like how do you kind of use the materials around you to make the world that reflects you and your life and your community, even though it's not, you know, it's not the material that you would maybe be drawn to use, but this is what you have, so like you have to kind of make it work. And so I think yeah, these are all kind of like abstract, more kind of feelings type of technology, but I think there's a kind of there are some kind of intuitive technologies within that embodied history of exilic and migratory traditions that I think just are in my life. And that when I learned this language, I was like, oh, this is already a thing. But yeah.
I'm thinking about like this this moment of encountering the technologies of the solidarity economy and the solidarity economy, and having that encounter be like a response to something that either already existed or maybe was missing. And I guess my grandparents are also Holocaust survivors, but it's like their stories are very fragmented, and I can kind of like extrapolate and guess about like I have guesses about what kind of relationships like facilitated their survival. But also for myself, I grew up in the place that my grandparents moved to, and they would call the place that they call Israel. And in that place, but the environment that I grew up in was, I would say, like really capitalist in a serious way. There were some attempts for that place to not be like that, but as a settler colonial project, it really embraced capitalism in a wholesome way. And my encounter with the solidarity economy was one where I felt like, oh, this is here are some models to enact the kind of care that I think that resonates with me and that I need. And like, it's actually not necessarily something that I grew up with. I mean, I grew up in a culture more of like violence and exploitation. So it's kind of like something to strive for, and like just like something that offers a little bit of hope and care in like both symbolic and concrete ways.
Yeah, I think well, what you said, what all of y'all are talking about is the act of solidarity and the act of resistance when the ancestors that the elders that you come from aren't necessarily fully aligned with you, right? That this kind of history of violence that many of us have relationships to, and as people on U.S. like land or U.S. I don't know, U.S. occupied territories, and like also like who pay taxes and contribute to a larger militaristic force, like how do you understand the scale of friendship in activating the solidarity economy into a force of organizing and mobilizing? One of the things that Art.coop is trying to figure out is, you know, so many of the people that we work with are pursuing anti-racist work or talking about anti-capitalist work, but are often siloed because of the nature of being in the arts world or in the culture world. And how do you, I guess my question is like, what do you guys see as the connections to larger movement for liberation and self-determination? We talk about Palestine, talk about Kashmir, we can talk about indigenous lands here in the US under Island. Yeah, I don't know if that brings up any threads.
I mean, I can share just an initial kind of gut response and something that your questions, Shruti, made me think about is this will just be like a little thread, but I think, yeah, something that's been coming up for me is like how the ways that these kind of broader structures of power show up really clearly in our interpersonal relationships, like in really mundane, kind of everyday ways. And I think there's ways that like these bigger systems sometimes feel so like hard to touch and grasp and kind of, you know, like you can it's almost like throwing a baseball into the ocean or something. Like it's not, you know, especially if, you know, still in process of building collective power and all of these things. And so I think looking at it from that perspective and noticing the ways that broader structures of power are kind of internalized in our psychologies and in our everyday relationships, that becomes a kind of ground that actually, you know, working through those things in our relationships is a way to kind of get at those bigger structures as well. And I think it kind of changes the ways that, at least for me, I see my relationships as actually like the ground of my work in a lot of ways, like even just like really simple, like everyday one-on-one interactions kind of have all this weight to them for that reason, I think. Um, and so, yeah, I guess I just wanted to kind of share that as like one kind of spark that your question kind of gave me as a starting point.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Kimmy, because that, to me, like if the work is really not grounded in healing justice, then it's just continues to be this like disembodied, like theoretical framework. Yeah, then I completely agree with you and hear you that it's just like continuing to replicate these systems that we're trying to transform out of. And so even like looking back on my own journey of, you know, first kind of trying to learn things theoretically and intellectually because of my own educational privilege, and then seeing how empty, like how I couldn't integrate my brain learning with my body, and that like gap that existed for so long, and then how generative, this is a weird thing to say, but how generative my conflicts in my interpersonal relationships became to integrate that, you know, like practice what you preach, whatever, that whole concept. So yeah, I feel like the way to connect this like big scale, the macro, you know, if it's not directly in correlation to the way we're practicing it in the day to day and in the micro, what's the point?
Yeah, I completely resonate with all of that. And I feel like the process of narrative and culture shifting has to start with us internally. And I think that the theoretical aspect, like you were talking about, is like part of the beginning of that. Because once you start to learn about like the truth of the dominant narrative, then you start to go through this internal, hopefully spiritual process that then makes you realize, oh, okay, I have a role within the greater collective. And that spiritual aspect is also what connects us as a collective. And I think the basis of relationship is really what creates the distinction between like the solidarity economy and capitalism, because you can still have a co-op and really uh, be rooted in capitalist values. But if you are working on the relationships that you are in community with on an ongoing basis, constantly checking in and respectfully checking each other too, so that we can continue this collective evolution towards liberation.
Just uplifting Ashanti's question in the chat about how has this influenced our current work about our ancestral technologies regarding economies.
Yeah, and maybe even talking about what Ebony, you just said about like holding people up and holding people in towards collective growth, maybe talking about ancestral technologies relating to economics, but also relating to calling people in and like critical compassion.
I can answer this question of how the ancestral technologies influence my work. And I think one ancestral technology that really inspires me is this idea of preservation, not just an idea, but a practice of preservation. And so, what does preservation look like, especially today? And in my day to day life, I'm thinking of like, how are my practices, my daily practices, rooted in preservation? So, what are my buying practices? Is what I'm buying producing harm uh, to prevent the preservation of land? What type of cultural narratives am I sharing through the podcast that I host, which is Cooperative Journal? And how am I preserving the authentic culture and the authentic stories that people are sharing that are related to solidarity economy examples around the world? And so for me, this cultural preservation, the culture of the ancestors that we talk about, how are we uplifting that in our work? And for me, it's through these interviews and storytelling processes that that are related to these ancient futures. So how are we taking information from the past and adapting it to our modern day capitalist economic structures?
I'm going to do maybe a bit of a turn and ask if there's anything people want to say about what we've talked about and connecting it to like digital technologies, understanding, right, that like we're here virtually and there are digital technologies that bring us together. So, Ebony, when you talk about consumption and our relationship to capitalism, and we also talk about solidarity and like US empire and capitalism, how do we understand how these digital technologies are like other traditionally defined technologies, like how they can both facilitate and prohibit the ancestral technologies that we've talked about and mitigate the scale even, or help the scale. I wonder.
Yeah, I think in terms of digital technologies, for me, that probably has impacted like a lot of other people has been Zoom. I do a lot of after school youth programming, or did back during COVID, and it was really cool to have like digital technology such as like Zoom and Google, what is it? The Google board where you can draw. Is that called Google board? Okay. And then there's also Miro and those apps being used. And it was really cool for like kids to be able to come to after school programs, even though they were like caretaking for their siblings, or like they had to work after school jobs. And it was just, they were able to do all this stuff and be in community because they didn't have to like go from school to the bus or from school to XYZ. And yeah, 40 kids every single other day, and it was really cool. But then school started, and then all of a sudden a lot of students started like fighting with each other, throwing punches, getting really angry fast, being very like antisocial, and it was like really just like overwhelming and frustrating to be face to face with people. And a lot of youth went from like elementary straight into like high school, and like I couldn't imagine that for myself, to like not, yeah, just go straight with a different age group from that young of an age group. And it was just really overwhelming. And I just kind of saw how like the downsides of being on Zoom, even though there's so much more like accessibility to being in types of communities through the quarantine, like it really impacted a lot of the ways we like were with each other. But I think like a really positive example of like I've experienced with this video camera world has been Discord, and especially with like virtual care lab has been cool. So I got into virtual care lab like after virtual care lab like aired, so like at the end of 2021, and this is kind of when people were being pulled by their IRL like life with like their online life that they still were kind of keeping during COVID. And virtual care lab was slowly kind of like naturally not doing much programming, trying to do more internal organizing and just sharing things on the Discord. But even though like that kind of shift was like naturally happening, I think overall, like it was like a one-stop community space that I could access anytime, anywhere. There's like link sharing, game playing, film watching, and like just conversations on Sunday mornings. And it was just always constant and live on Discord. And I think that's like one of the really cool things that like digital technology can do with like community spaces, and like accessing so many different viewpoints and people who challenge you from different places. Yeah, but I definitely have seen it just impact folks in real life. So
I'd love to link this question with what you brought up earlier, Shruti, about critical compassion. Especially because during COVID, I hosted this kind of abolitionist for artists popular education series called Media Tools for Liberation, and we had like over almost 400 people for a few weeks. And so folks were really craving this culture shift and education around it. And I think one of the biggest things we ran into was the what's the word? The distance that can often come with technology and with existing in the virtual world. And so we were talking a lot about like the ethics, the correlation of ethics and values from IRL into virtual world, and how to not, completely replicate the current systems of oppression that are happening in this dimension into the online dimension, especially around accountability. I think many people don't come from a community or culture that's practicing accountability outside of, the carceral system that's imposed on us here on Turtle Island. And so what came out of those conversations that were all online, all on Zoom, a lot of workshops and creative sessions amongst artists on how to deal with the scale, that like, how do you hold people accountable when it's so large and so massive? And so scheming about like pods and using the language of pods that's also your accountability circle, so I think while the lure of to me, the danger of using technology to deal with scale can kind of mirror institutionalization in the real world. And so, yeah, I get curious about like, okay, how can we use technology to to deal with the scale, but in a way that still has like pods of accountability and pods that require participation to continue to be carried out.
Yeah, I resonate with several threads that are going on. Also, LP, I resonate with your reflections around like being an educator. I worked with youth for many years before I moved to LA, and then I transitioned into working in higher ed kind of spaces, first as a TA and now as in a faculty position. And I think, and I'm also resonating, Rad, with part of what you're saying around that, those kind of initial months of the pandemic where all of a sudden there was this hunger for a culture shift. And I'm like, where the fuck did that go? Like, I think, I mean, just to kind of give a little context, like for the like 2 years before shutdowns happened in the context of Turtle Island in May of 2020 or whenever that was, March of 2020. My collaborators and I had been working on putting together this toolkit for cooperative work or cooperative cultural work that we had facilitated through a series of workshops with folks, members of Press Press's expanded community who are part of worker owner cooperatives, mostly in Baltimore. And we had finally kind of reached the final stages of putting together this thing, and the pandemic and shutdown started. And so we had to kind of use technology in a more kind of real way to actually distribute this resource that we had made, and we turned it into a digital publication. Versus, it was also like a printed zine, but it was, the digital publication really took that form. And I think it coincided with this moment where people, unplanned on our end, were actually hungry for people who weren't already working in cooperative and collective structures, seemed to be like more hungry for this kind of resource. And kind of flash forward to today, like I think one of the emotional things that I'm feeling right now is this kind of like, I feel so unabashedly changed by the past 3 years, and not that they are so different from, the histories of other bullshit that has been going on, but I do think that there's, maybe those things have been exacerbated. And on a broader cultural level, I feel this kind of resistance to acknowledging that deep, I don't know, like all of the grief, all of the kind of weight of everything that has happened has been kind of just like thrown aside. And I think I feel it in education spaces too. Like I think I'm one of the few folks in my in the space that I teach that kind of really, seeks out, I think, more of a balance between like virtual and in-person learning, because I think there's ways that it's just like more access centered, as LP pointed out. And I'm just like, how do we kind of find more balance between both of those things and acknowledge the depth of grief and feelings and like things that we're kind of holding right now rather than just throw them aside. And I think, um, yeah, I think I'm just responding to this like deep kind of suppression or erasure that feels like it's going on. And also the ways that that manifests in the technologies that we are kind of encouraged to use or not use to do our work. Um, I hope that like ramble made sense, but yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of sitting with.
Um, I'm thinking about kind of like connecting a couple of the things that that were said, like I guess, yeah, like being changed by these years, especially in relation to digital and network technology. It feels like a lot of people kind of like were made to practice communication across these channels. It just showed up in so many contexts enough that it like that Zoom made a ton of profit, and I think that it's not. I don't think that the digital technology offers any solution, honestly, to anything. I mean, I like structures of accountability, and like the way that communities exist online is completely dependent on how the communities come together and like what sort of agreements and culture they create. So, but at the same time, I think that having this practice to communicate online quickly has changed something. And I'm seeing it now also in a higher education space. I'm currently striking with part-time faculty at the new school. And as part-time faculty, I've been really siloed off the rest of the faculty. And all of a sudden, when negotiations were happening and the idea of a strike emerged, hundreds of part-time faculty were able to very quickly come together online and formed new channels of communication that just didn't exist before, that enabled like really effective and inspiring organizing work. So I see that as being kind of an interesting shift where, like, if a need arises, people were so comfortable communicating in this way that didn't really add too much friction to the organizing process. I'm really so it's so nice to see how well people communicate. It's like it was a very new experience for me to like be a part of an online community that that somehow doesn't have so much friction to like emerge in their like virtual analog. Sorry, in their virtual version. But also everybody's communicating through channels that are owned by awful corporations, and I think that's worth being said as well.
Yeah, I've been thinking of this framing of study into action that Art.coop did. I think that's the series that Rad was facilitating too. And how important it is to take the study that maybe we're learning through digital technologies and actually put it into action in our local communities. And even this concept of preservation. If you're learning a medicine making workshop online, how are you then doing that in your own home and teaching it to other people? And one example that really greatly influenced me was doing an offers and needs market virtually. And I was trying to figure out like what tool can I use to communicate to my neighbors. And I ended up doing that online, but then like writing letters to my neighbors and organizing them in our building so that we can connect with each other to again deepen in those relationships and like learn what assets do we have as a community that we can then organize from.
Yeah, Ebony, I mean, I think that's exactly where I hope we would land today, is to talk about the different ways that we use the things that we've learned from our ancestors that are about friendship and communication and clarity and critical compassion, and then how we use them to ultimately change our relationships with harmful technologies, with the digital world, and with other forces that work against us. And I think it's really important that we talk about the transition, right, across these platforms from virtual to digital, or virtual to in person, back to virtual. And yeah, I really appreciate those reflections. I want to leave some space for all of y'all to add more. I also want to invite folks who are watching us to drop some questions in the chat. We're going to slowly flow into open Q&A. But if other folks want to drop some examples that they've experienced, participated in, of like shifting relationships, like writing letters with their neighbors to organize against, organize for better housing conditions.
I have a question for folks. I wonder if Kimmy shared about their toolkit, and Ebony shared about, going to her neighbors to get that offers and needs market started. I was curious if folks can continue sharing about their experience in many of the spaces that I've been in. I'm like kind of the first one talking about solidarity economy, and I'll kind of like be like, okay, let's go. And if I'm not actively the one organizing people to get educated, to build capacity, then it doesn't go anywhere. And I've kind of like hit a burnout point like about a year and a half ago. And I was like, I can't keep pulling people along. So I wonder if folks are just open to sharing how different ways they've found to get people into the work without feeling like they have to like drag them. And across in generations too, because I don't want to like leave elders out, who sometimes have a different relationship with virtual world. So that's also something I've been grappling with.
And on the other hand, like engaging younger folks who use different technologies that feel so unfamiliar.
I mean, okay, I was thinking about something kind of kindred, and like, this isn't totally an answer to your question, to your beautiful question, Rad. It just kind of complicates it. And I hope that that's an okay thing to add. I've been thinking a lot about, I mean, I resonate with your experience. Like, I think as somebody who moves in between like more kind of movement oriented spaces and like fine art spaces, which are like totally just like hot trash dumpster fire of like just wildness. Sometimes, not all of them, but a lot of them. I think something I've been experiencing is like, what happens like, I feel like I've had several relationships in my life where like I've tried to, in that kind of, in these spaces that are less a little bit socially oriented or less kind of pragmatically rooted in these values, like maybe it's talk but it's not like we're actually doing this thing. I've had, which has taken me a while to kind of fully acknowledge and work through. I've had relationships where I will like try to kind of practice my values and like hold somebody to account with compassion and like move with them and like not, you know, take the time and, you know, really try to practice these things. And I think there's times where it still doesn't work. And I feel like, you know, I feel the affects of like I feel not necessarily like, you know, physically bodily harmed, but like, you know, I feel the emotional ramifications of those relationships to a degree where like I can't continue to engage. And it's happened more for me during the past like year or two. And I guess just to add to your question, like, you know, I think that's not typically something that happens for me with folks who are more involved in these kinds of spaces, because I think the kind of the grounded value is like our relationships are what we're doing, and so we can't just like, you know, like this is actually really important. And I think, I guess to add to your question, like trying to verbalize it, like what do you do in relationships where like people don't necessarily see relationships in that same way, like they don't see them as like, you know, this is actually what the work is, like the work isn't like, you know, I don't know, these other more objectified things. um Maybe the answer is obvious and I'm just like, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think just to add to your question, it's like, yes, how do you like kind of move things along and deal with that isolation of being in an organizer position sometimes? But also, what do you do when, like, you know, you try your hardest with somebody that you really love and it just like doesn't click?
Yeah, so right now, we're trying to get the word out about just that there's $500,000 in ARPA funds, and, you know, youth ages 14 to 25 can propose a project and it can get voted on the community and be funded, like a chunk. And it's been really difficult to kind of get people interested in participatory budgeting in general. And at the beginning, Youth PB has been steered by Amanda Hudson, who created PB Oregon, but then made a branch Youth PB, hired youth consultants. These consultants made like an application for youth to make a council slash steering committee, and made the structure for the job. And then these youth came in, including me, and we made like a rule book for how to use the 500,000 by ARPA. And then from ARPA, and then, you know, now we're in this phase where we're helping people, youth, how to propose a project, teaching them how to grant write, do workshops before we even like start the whole thing. But in between this process, we've just been asking each other, like, is this even worth it? Like, because one of the requirements is that a nonprofit has to host the money because it's like government money. And I'm just like, wait, what? I didn't know that. I thought like we could just give it out. I thought the youth just owned it and we just like give it. But no, there's like structures around it. And then also we just thought about who would even like read a pamphlet on participatory budgeting. We talked about immigrant parents, and I was like, my mom would not pick up that form and she would not waste her time to go like say things that she wished was in the community and like trust that it's going to get funded. And so, yeah, we are now going to the phase of the events, and not many folks have gone to the events, and not many also nonprofits have been wanting to like host the projects, because like a part of that is also they have to take some of their capacity, because we are trying to choose like nonprofits that align with our values that the youth made. And one of our values is just like being youth centered from the start. being BIPOC led and centered, XYZ, and specifically those nonprofits already have low capacity, you know, and it's just this like constant like pile of stuff as we're going and trying to do this amazing thing where like youth get to lead their own projects and get funded up to like 50,000 for their dream projects, and it's voted on by the community. It's such a package, but there's like so many also caveats to it, and also just like getting the word out about PB and like a predominantly refugee and immigrant community has been really difficult, because like trusting government or anything that's like linked to government, like that's, yeah, I don't know what to expect from that, and not to expect from anything. And yeah, that's about it I have to share, but just some frustration I kind of felt as I was thinking about that. And yeah, thank you all for sharing. And I'm like, every time everyone talks, I just want to like unmute and be like, yes, yes. So I'm like nodding a lot. So hope you all know that.
Yes, I mean, LP nonprofits as ultimately a technology of colonialism and capitalism, and like understanding that you cannot use the tools of the empire to dismantle it. Yeah, I see, Ted, you put in the chat talking about the technology of creating a community garden in Ohlone territory, in response to LP's question in their bio. These kind of ways that we can slowly try to eat away at what nonprofits or other colonial technologies, capitalist technologies do, but ultimately, there has to be a larger call for an alternative solidarity-based model, right? And like, as much as friendships are about care and healing, they're also about like inviting each other to dream bigger. And I think that's the big reason why I wanted all of y'all to share this space with me, is I think each of you have taught me so much about dreaming into the future, and not just being compassionate towards oneself and one's community, but also thinking about what comes next, what comes after we are healed, right? And how do we continue to build that space? I know that we have 5 minutes left. I'm gonna let y'all totally have the last 5 minutes then, as you wish to reflect, etc. Oh.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what Rad said and reading what Ashanti said about most cultures loving to gather on food and rest, and how for me, I like don't have the bandwidth to convince people. And generally, the people that I'm teaching in workshops, they're already like on the path in some way. And so, for people that aren't, I like to create experiences and spaces where it's like a little portal into the solidarity economy, and it's really intentional about um, how we're relating with each other. Like, if somebody, for instance, I've been doing these free Black wellness clinics, and something as simple as like having conversational cards that aren't surface level questions so that people can deepen in relationship with each other, and having free food and free healing services, like then that starts to plant a seed within people of like, wait, why isn't this generally free? Why don't we generally have spaces that aren't forcing us to that aren't transactional and forcing us to receive payment in exchange for love or something tangible. So just creating these little pockets where people start to feel the world that they dream about.
I love food and feeding each other, as Ebony and Oh No and Kimmy, LP, Rad, y'all can know very easily too if you come down to Brooklyn. I think like the act of feeding another person is really helpful because it's customizing a meal to somebody's like dietary preferences or needs can feel really like careful, but then at the same time like inviting them to try new things, I guess. Very, very loose metaphor. But it meets the physical needs. And the act of cooking together, I think, is also, it's the act of creation. And that's what ultimately all of us engage in, right? Is there is some incredible power to sharing that with other people, that invites in the compassion.
I have a question for us, if that's okay. I was curious to hear about like what are the kind of spaces or like where is the joy for you in your practice in your work? Like where do you find, I mean, I think food is like obviously like food is joyful. But yeah, I'm curious to hear like, yeah, where is the joy for you in your practice?
I love feeling people be aligned, even if it's just for a moment, and like feeling the aliveness that comes when someone comes alive, whether that's through work I've made in community arts, where folks come together to create a performance, or whether that's through our food sovereignty work and getting to see people like open up corn husks and just like see them be so aligned and alive. Those moments bring me a lot of joy. Thanks for that question.
In the chat, Alan put that Ellen's joy is sharing music and the nonverbal communication from and to and with an audience. Yeah.
For me, my joy definitely kind of aligns with Rad's a lot. Okay, wow, I just used the line. But it's definitely when I'm able to start like square one with folks. Like we just start from the basics or like the beginning or like a new beginning, and everyone is just very open to making mistakes and just learning through the process together. And I think just bringing up gardens in the chat and thinking about food. I'm part of a BIPOC community garden space in Knott Park in Portland. And in this space, it's like, I think garden plots in general, everyone knows you have to rent them. I just learned that last year, but I'm just letting folks know you have to rent them, community garden spaces. But this one specifically, Unite Oregon, which is an immigrant and refugee rights organization, got a huge plot area for free for 3 years for local members. And so our whole bit of starting the whole thing was specifically getting people plots that have never gardened before, who are part of the BIPOC community in Portland, and also choosing 3 of those people who also don't have that much garden experience as garden managers. And I'm one of the managers that has 0 experience in gardening. And it's just been so much fun just to like learn things that people will be talking to people and be like, you know, this is the season. We have to make an event tomorrow. And this is like, it's called Tending Time. Really cute name. I thought of it. But so tomorrow we were supposed to do like ground cover seeds on things or just putting tarp over things to put our plots in hibernation before inspection. And we're all in the chat and we're like, does anyone know what a ground cover is? And we're like, actually, no, I just heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend that we need to do that. So then we just like all research together, and like we're gonna bring the materials for the other plot members tomorrow and just like work on square one together in this first time, just experimenting. And I think that's like the magic of like interpersonal relationship work, is when you get to that part where you're just co-learning and like just discovering together. And yeah, I think that's the joy.
Yeah, I just simply find joy in other people's joy, and seeing the same faces is really affirming. Um, whether it's an event, whether it's through work, because it feels like there's a network that's being created. And that really brings me joy, because we can only sustain as a network.
I'm thinking about the joy of transformation, witnessing it and being witnessed when it happens, and seeing transformation happening through conversation and as a relational thing. It's really beautiful. And yeah, I think that's something I consider, I draw a lot of joy from.
Kimmy, what about you? If you'd like to share what brings joy for you.
I was like, I didn't think of my own answer when I asked that, which is a classic thing that I do. But I think, reflecting, it's really nice. Thanks for entertaining my question, y'all. I think just kind of reflecting and listening to you all, something that came to mind was like moments of ease with friends or in community, or even with strangers sometimes, where that are rare, I think, considering how uneasy everything else can feel. But I think kind of simple moments of ease where there's, yes, alignment, or clarity, or even just an alignment around embracing ambiguity, or, on clarity. I think, yeah, small degrees of kind of ease and groundedness, I think, give me joy and calm in the context of, yeah, the dumpster fire.
I love that. Well, here's to each of us having our moments of joy, and I hope today has been a little sparkling of joy, to connect with people and see that there is alignment, or at least interest in becoming alignment, or interest in falling into ambiguity, like you said, Kimmy, together. I'm going to wrap up our session. I'm going to thank everyone who's tuned in. Welcome. We're going to keep dreaming together. Be sure to check back in on the Eventry platform, where we'll put all the links, the amazing work that these folks have mentioned and talked about. And that is it from us, I think.